Luciana Berger.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr. Howarth, this afternoon. Fantastic to have you in the chair for this very timely debate, and I congratulate my honourable friend and constituency neighbour on securing this debate this afternoon. I think that all of us here today will see in our weekly constituency surgeries low pay, precarious work, zero-hour contracts, energy price rises and benefit delays, leaving thousands of people, our constituents, living on the edge of poverty, if not submerged by it. And in these circumstances, it only takes an unexpected bill, a family illness or an accident to leave people without the means to properly house, clothe or feed themselves and their families. Mr. Howarth, the number of cases like this increased dramatically for my constituents last year when the full impact of the concentric tax credits debacle became felt. And we heard earlier, just a moment ago, from my honourable friend, the member for Garson and Halewood, about how it impacted on her constituents as well. The most extreme examples of hardship as a result of this fiasco were felt by people like my constituent Michelle, who faced repossession as her tax credits were stopped simply because a previous tenant's mobile phone bill was still registered at her address. In Liverpool, as in so many places around the country, this personal financial precariousness is compounded by the government's long assault on local community services and networks that have traditionally supported people to get back on their feet. As my honourable friend has alluded to in his remarks, we have seen from central government a cut of 58% to our budget since 2010, and Liverpool City Council is faced with making a further £90 million worth of cuts over the next 3 years, bringing the total amount of central government spending cuts since 2010 to a staggering £420 million. And I'll say a little bit more about the cumulative impact of these cuts in a moment. It is simply not possible, and I'm sure that no minister in their heart of hearts really believes it to be possible, to make such deep cuts over such a sustained period of time without damaging the social fabric that protects people in need from the worst effects of poverty. The All-Party Parliamentary Group on Fuel Poverty and Energy Efficiency has praised Liverpool City Council's Healthy Homes programme, which brings together help and advice with practical support on keeping our constituents' homes warmer to tackle fuel poverty. And it's particularly relevant in this debate. My constituency is in the top 5 in the country, according to the government's new definition of fuel poverty, that are affected in this way. Liverpool is just one of a few councils around the country that sees the value in this activity and does its very best to continue funding a team of environmental health officers who can use enforcement powers to make unwilling landlords improve their properties if there are health and safety risks to their tenants. Healthy Homes has supported around 46,000 initial assessments, resulting in 22,000 referrals for additional support over the past 7 years. And the programme estimates that it saved our NHS around £55 million over a 10-year period, while the enforcement work has made private landlords invest an additional £5.5 million in their properties. It's proof that a relatively small investment in long-term preventative support carried out by local councils in partnership with local agencies can make a huge difference and actually save money in the long term, as well as improving the health and well-being of local people. Now, as a local MP, I've referred so many of my constituents to this service who have gone on to see improvements in their homes and are now able to afford to heat their homes properly, particularly during the cold winter months. However, government cuts threaten our council's ability to continue to be able to deliver this vital service for our constituents. And of course, our council is doing all it can to protect the most vulnerable. For instance, in children's services, money has been set aside to maintain our network of children's centres for the next 12 months because we see the value in providing that vital service with the aim of devising a viable option for the future of the services. But they still have to find savings of £4.1 million, which will be made, they intend, by reducing the cost of care placements and packages and increasing the number of in-house foster carers. There is a reason why the previous Labour government invested in creating over 3,000 children's centres across our country and investing in those early years of a child's life in order to break that cycle that we know still persists in our country and is getting only worse, unfortunately, now. That means that where a child is born will determine their life chances and life outcomes, and that's why these children's centres can and should be making a difference. The council now cannot deal with the extent of child poverty in Liverpool with a government in Westminster that is not interested in contending with this very vital issue. Under this government, 1 in 3 children in my constituency, over 6,000, are living in relative poverty, and almost half of them are in families where at least one parent is in work. The subject on the order paper today is poverty in the Liverpool City region, but of course our children are not alone in experiencing the pain of Tory policies. Across the country we've seen an increase of 200,000 children living in poverty, up to 3.9 million in a single year. And that's the price children across our country are paying for a Tory government's failure to adequately tackle inequality. In one ward in my constituency, Picton, over half the children, 52%, are after housing costs are taken into account living in poverty. In Kensington and Fairfield ward, it's 43%, and in Old Swan ward, it's 34%. And so it goes on, in ward after ward, right across our city region, and year after year, children's life chances are being stymied because government policies have created an economy built on casualised, low-paid, temporary and precarious work for their parents and have removed that safety net which previously ensured that children were being supported. For comparison, Mr Howarth, in the constituency of the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead, the figure is just 13% of children who are, after housing costs, living in poverty. And in the constituency of the Right Honourable Member for Runnymede and Weybridge, the figure is 16%. But frankly, Mr Howarth, whether the percentage is 13%, 16%, or as in my constituency overall, 33% of children after housing costs living in poverty, I believe these figures bring shame on the government, and we must all recognise that poverty is not spread evenly around our country. Some parts, like our Liverpool City region, being a case in point, carry a heavier burden. And I fear that too many members on the government benches carry with them a view of some cities in the north, such as Liverpool City region, as home to people deserving not of a chance, but of contempt. And I don't make that point lightly. And I would ask members to ponder this single statistic produced by the Children's Society of over 3,000 of the children living in poverty in Liverpool, in my constituency, Liverpool Wavertree, are from families where at least one adult is in work. These are people doing the right thing, heading out the door every morning, working hard, and returning home only to see their children still living in poverty.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for giving way. She's making a very powerful speech. Would she attempt to explain what the government's thinking might be, given that the disparity in poverty between certain areas that she's just explained? Why, in the Wirral, we have lost 57% of local authority funding, Liverpool has lost 58%, and yet there are some areas normally represented by Conservative MPs that have seen nowhere near those levels of cuts, and the average is 37.
Well, I thank my right honourable for making that very important contribution. It's a point I was seeking to make later on in my speech, but it's because the coalition government decided to remove the waiting for deprivation. And every member sat having contributed or about to contribute in this debate has made this very point to ministers on government benches, that if we'd had the average cut in Liverpool City Region or in Liverpool, we'd have an additional £84 million a year. And that's £84 million that we could actually make a very significant difference to the life chances and life outcomes of the people that we are elected to represent. We also have a government, I believe, that has that talks about this aspiration and talks a lot about improving aspiration. But there are people who aspire every day to have enough money at the end of the week to put food on the table, clothes on their children's back, and to secure a roof over their heads, and not have to ever at any moment choose between those three. And I would also echo a point made by my honourable friend for Liverpool Walton about the government's proposed job centre closure plans. Liverpool is the city out of all of the cities in England which will be hit hardest by this proposal. It will affect 40% of our job centres, and I presented a petition only last night on behalf of hundreds of my constituents against the 2 proposed job centre closures in our area. This is a very significant issue, and if the government is serious about dealing with inequality, it doesn't make sense to affect Liverpool City Region in the way that it's seeking to do so. Let us also not forget that it was in 2015 that the Tory government scrapped the child poverty targets brought in by the last Labour government. Ministers no longer have a legal duty to tackle the number of children in poverty. They believe themselves to be essentially unaccountable for their policies, but we will hold them accountable because we meet our constituents and their children in our surgeries every single week. Faces like those of my constituent Frank, who, upon obtaining custody of his child last year, faced months of delays and administrative errors in trying to have his child benefit and child tax credits put into payment. It left him financially unable to properly provide for the child placed in his care, and plunge this newly united family into extreme and abject poverty. The members opposite may say, well, of course, the poverty target was measuring the wrong thing. Poverty ain't what it used to be in my day. Children going hungry, now that's real poverty. And if so, I would also reiterate the very significant comments made by my honourable friends for Garston and Hale Wood. In the interest of time, and I'm conscious that another member wishes to speak, I'll just reflect very briefly on this very serious issue of food poverty, which in my view affects too many people, not just in the Liverpool City region, but right across our country. The Liverpool Central Food Bank in my constituency, one of many food banks, unfortunately, in my constituency, has fed a total of over 43,000 people, including 15,000 children. And the increase in people having to use that service is because of an increase in people being sanctioned. And many of those people are children that are not just people having to use it in a crisis, but are now chronic users of having to use that service because they simply aren't able, for a sustained period of time, able to put enough food on the table. I've raised the issue of food poverty. In fact, I had the first debate in this House back in 2012 about food poverty. I also made a film about it called Breadline Britain. In that moment, there was just a few 100,000 people that had to access emergency food aid. But it's worth reiterating the point made earlier, the fact that over 1 million people in our country in the last year had to access emergency food aid in the 6th richest nation of the world. I think that is a stain on our national consciousness, and I'm ashamed to live in a country where that is the case. And frankly, I'm appalled and disappointed that we still have a situation where these figures are getting only larger every single year. And the issue about children going to school and not being able to have food before they get to school, as my honourable friend for Walton alluded to, I've been a long-term supporter of organisations like Magic Breakfast that help schools be able to provide breakfast for the children that go to them, because there are too many reports, again increasing reports from teachers, that there are children sat in schools in this country where they are not able to access breakfast before they come to school. And if it wasn't for those breakfast clubs, they wouldn't be able to sit and concentrate and be able to learn properly in our classrooms. I just wanted to come back and conclude about the very significant issue about the cuts that we've seen. They have been significant, and I believe it's not just how much is in the pot, it's how it's distributed, and we've been disproportionately affected because of the taking out that waiting for deprivation. I believe that the government's actually washed its hands of those tough choices and passed them on to local councils, like in our city region, and the people that it serves. The fact that our early intervention grant has been cut by nearly 50%, 44% between 2010 and 2015-16. It's worth reminding people that the early intervention grant is to support children and to support those most in need, and the fact that it's been savaged in this way is no surprise that people are really struggling to get by. And as I said in my opening, it only takes one unforeseen event to push people over the edge and into debt, and that's why, according to the Children's Society, there are nearly 2,500 children in my constituency that are living in families in problem debt. Around a third of families in problem debt say they have to cut back on food within the last month, a third have cut back on heating, and a third on clothing. Mr. Howarth, these are the basics of a decent life, and this is what's happening in our country in 2017. There are really tough choices being made in Britain today, to choose food over heating, heating over clothes, or to run it even deeper into debt. We know that children in poverty are more likely to fall behind in school, less likely to secure a job, and more likely to experience mental and physical illness. Mr. Howarth, it really doesn't have to be like this. We've heard from other honourable members about the incredible charitable and voluntary sector efforts that happen across our city region, but on their own, these valiant measures and efforts are not enough. And on behalf of all my constituents, young and old, and all the people of the Liverpool City region, can I urge the Minister in his response to seriously consider the issue of poverty and to outline exactly what he and his department and his government are going to do to properly address it.
Yeah.